So good afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where your local time zone happens to occur. I'm really glad to be at the AAS meeting. This is my first meeting, even though I've always loved spiders. And I'm very grateful for the virtual platform that enables me to join you this year. My talk, in spite of the title, is really about arachnids rather than Euchelicerata, the larger group. As far as I know, there are no introduced species of Xiphosura in the United States. In fact, the population on the mid-Atlantic is on steep decline. Xiphosura are horseshoe crabs, as you probably know that. I'd like to, if it will let me change the screen, I'd like to start out with something about my background, because my talk is actually a request for your help. And my personal research has found over the years that I get more help if someone knows me. I've actually done this kind of study before. So I want to tell you a little bit about me so that maybe you'll have some sympathy for my needs. I've worked for 20 years at the US Geological Survey, and 20 years before that, I worked in Costa Rica. So the US GS is known for a lot of things: maps, disaster management, Earth observations, and we also do a lot of mineral and water monitoring, as well as, since 1995, biology. And I work with biological issues related to invasive species. I work with data. I'm a biologist. I've analyzed stomach contents of insect predators like bats and frogs. I'm also an entomologist. I've assisted people in the tropics, specifically on heliconius butterflies and microstigmus wasps. My graduate work was with spiders, but it was just a master's degree with no thesis. My most recent degree, actually, I'm a librarian. I have a master's in library and information science, and that sort of provides a basis for the project I've been working on. But before I get to the project, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the reason for the project. You've all heard about invasive species and the harm that they cause, but let's compare the relative damage. A lot of you deal with economic, well, maybe not in this breakout session, but economics of euchelicerates and arachnids are important. And with invasive species, they are important too. USGS works with earthquakes, and the average damage in the US due to earthquakes is about 6.1 billion. This is a little bit old, the data, but it averages about this much. And the impact, the negative impact on an invasive species, has been estimated more than once at over $100 billion. So invasive species are insidious, misunderstood, not really noticed sometimes, although they're more popular now. So the work that I'm talking to you about, oh dear. That's interesting.
I think you just need to reshare
Yeah.
your slide.
I think, can you see it? No.
Not yet.
It bounced me out. I guess I pushed a button too hard. Sorry about that. So this is a slide about version 3.0 of this product that I've been working on for 4 years now. It's a comprehensive list of non-native species that are established in 3 major regions of the United States. This slide has broken out the euchelicerates, and you can see, come on, yeah, that there are over 500 of them established in the different regions. Hawaii being a very, very very large impact by all different species, but also euchelicerates. So the next 4 slides, are just pie charts of the breakdown of the groups that we have. And this is all orders, all regions. And you can see that we have a lot of Trombitiformes, Araneae, Mesostigmata, and Sarcoptiformes. They're the largest groups that occur as introduced species in these regions. Trombitiformes are the largest group of mites, so that's not real surprising that they have 35% of the lists of the 500 arachnids. I imagine some of you realize Mesostigmata are a group of mites that may not necessarily be parasitic. So these species that are causing damage may or may not be parasites. In Alaska, we really have very little knowledge about introduced species, euchelicerates. There are only 4 species that have been reported, and they're on this screen. And 2 of them are ticks, and 1 is daddy longlegs. So in Hawaii, this is the larger trend. Trombitiformes are the largest, Mesostigmata, followed by Araneae and Sarcoptiformes. So 449 species in Hawaii and 69 species in the conterminous United States, half of which are spiders. There is one analysis that I did that I sort of hesitated to share with you because it's a qualitative value description of the status of each taxon in the region. We included from the literature the labels that were provided by the source about whether the species was considered introduced or invasive in that locality. You can see that the term that was most commonly used was adventive. What was meant by these terms was not always consistent among publications, thus my hesitation to include it. We're trying to make this more standardized. We'd love to have help from you to help us standardize the terminology that's used. The example that drives me crazy is the adventive example. Occasionally it means passing through and not established. Another definition is having arrived in a new region with no assistance from man. But we found that many of our references were using the term adventive to mean that they were locally established via an unknown pathway. You'll notice that 78%, that's 410 of the arachnids were labeled adventive, and only 2%, or 7 of the 522 taxa, were categorized as naturalized or invasive. Overall, only 2 species were reported as being introduced on purpose for biocontrol. They were 2 mites that were introduced to combat aphids in the lower 48. I'm sure there's more, but we just have not found the literature that makes those assertions. I looked more closely at the arachnid names on the last published version of our list, and these are ones that have made it to 2 different regions of the 3 regions that we studied. 11 of these are spiders, 2 of them are ticks, and there's a mite. I'm sure, being arachnologists, that you are very familiar with most of these species, but I don't know if you realize that they're non-native. So in closing, I have 2 quick slides that show how we have integrated. So our database is really a very basic resource, and it's been used to do other kinds of studies. We combined our resource with the databases from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. These are species occurrence databases. And we were able to determine that of the species that are in GBIF in Hawaii, please take into account, this is an estimate about species richness as non-native species in all 3 regions for all taxa, not just arachnids. So Hawaii has more than 2,000 different taxa per 10,000 square kilometers. That's the little box on the right, all those little dots, more than 2,000 different species, not individuals, but species. Whereas Alaska, on the other hand, the other extreme, it has only 3 non-native taxa per 10,000 square kilometers. Related to this, we drew it down to the county level. We combined GBIF data. And so this is all species, both non-native and native. And this shows at the county level, the percent of the species found in that county that are non-native. And it ranges from 3 to over 33%. You can see Hawaii sitting at the bottom is the darkest because they had the densest, the highest percentage of non-native species richness.
Sorry, I was supposed to say 10 minutes.
It's okay, I'm almost done.
I figured.
So what can you do? How can you contribute? We need reviewers. We're looking for co-authors. We're looking for feedback from experts about arachnids that are introduced to these 3 regions. And the status of their establishment, whether they are invasive, adventive, or just in the background, sitting there, taking their time, or if their impact is not known. You can email me references and databases or links to things. You can email me to ask for the draft, and I will share it with you, and then you can comment back. Eventually, we hope to get small grants for experts to improve and help maintain different portions of the list. And the coming version of the list, currently under expert review, will be called the US Register of Introduced and Invasive Species, and it will follow the format suggested by the IUCN Invasive Species Specialist Group. Please let me know if you can help us make our introduced species list better, or if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So you've already gotten one offer of interest with an email in the chat, Annie, and I see a question has already popped up for you. So the question is from Michael Draney asking, is the higher proportion of non-native acari versus other arachnids in Hawaii simply due to the focus on agriculture?
It's something that we don't really know. It would be good to have somebody take the list and try to figure it out. It is true that the publications, well, actually, most of the publications in the Hawaii list actually come from Bishop Museum. So there is a very strong representation in the literature that is not agricultural necessarily. But we were thinking that the difference between Alaska and Hawaii is commodity based, even though the publications may not be emphasizing, or may be emphasizing agriculture. The movements and the movements of species also is really closely related to agriculture. Alaska has very few people. Invasive species, by definition, are moved by people. So Hawaii, being an island that depends on all kinds of external trade movements, will have more non-native and invasive species than Alaska.
Certainly makes sense. And Linda Rayer asks a related question, which is, are the areas of higher invasives always linked to port cities or transport, like in the Great Lakes, or are there other issues?
We assumed that might be the case. And in the map that I showed, the Florida, I can't bring it back up, sorry. Florida and California and the ports do seem to tend to be higher.
She follows up quickly with why Louisiana.
Study.
Why Louisiana? And I think it's probably for similar reasons, because it's not so much a port city, but there's a lot of commodities movement via boat.
And it also depends on the publications, unfortunately, because this
Sure.
This is entirely based on publications, so there will be that bias. In areas that are understudy, there's not as much data, and so not as many species reported.
So Annie, I would, given that you're interested in getting help from folks that are here and are already, in some cases, doing efforts that might be useful to you, I would encourage you to put your email again into the chat.
Oh, yes.
And while you do that, I'm going to call up our next speaker,